Hey everybody, welcome back. Today I want to do just a quick little review of some of the big ideas in the chapter on elasticities. Elasticities are challenging sometimes. Some people have an issue with them. I had an issue with them and I kind of thought, oh, well, I just won't pay attention to this and it'll go away. They don't go away. Elasticities are everywhere. And when we think about what an elasticity is in general, it's just a measure of responsiveness, right? We know that certain things affect other things. When we're talking about demand, we know that when price goes up, quantity demanded is going to tend to go down. But how much is the elasticity? So there can be elasticities of everything. One joke I like to make is there could be an elasticity associated with a beautiful day and classroom attendance, right? If it's a gorgeous day, you might be more likely to skip class. So there's an elasticity that's going to tell us how much of an effect a beautiful day is going to have on classroom attendance, and it's going to be based on other factors. And so elasticities are all around us, and that's what the chapter is trying to tell you is, there's price elasticities, there are income elasticities, cross-price elasticities, so many different kinds of elasticities. And the big thing here, there's a couple of big things we want to think about. We want to think about what determines these elasticities. When we're talking about price elasticity of demand, it's going to be whether the good is a necessity or a luxury. Whether it has a lot of substitutes or not, how narrowly or broadly it's defined. So if I'm talking about jeans, the price of jeans going up, there are other things you could buy, right? You could buy pants, you could buy shorts, you could buy khakis, something like that. But if I'm talking about all clothing, the price of all clothing going up, there aren't a lot of good substitutes because it's very broadly defined. And so that's going to limit our ability to change our behavior and reduce the quantity we consume. And so those kinds of things are going to have an effect. The other thing that's always going to play a role in elasticities is time. The more time we have, the more responsive we can be, and the greater those elasticities are going to be. So my favorite example, some of you probably already heard it, is gas prices. Let's say you're driving to work, driving to school, you're late for an appointment, and you need to get gas. If you stop at the gas station and the gas price went up, in that moment, there's not much you can do. You're going to be really inelastic. You can't be flexible in your behavior. But the next day, the next week, the next month, the next year or years, as gas prices go up, you can alter your behavior. And so as time goes on, we're going to expect elasticity to get bigger and bigger. Think about if rents suddenly went down. I know I'd get a bigger place or my own place, right? But I can't do that today. It would take me a couple of months to figure it out, maybe a couple of years, those kinds of things. We're going to be more responsive to with time. We can't respond necessarily in the moment, but we can always respond more with more time. So that's important when we're thinking about elasticity of demand. With elasticity of supply, you want to think about what makes it easier for firms to supply goods. So it's going to be availability of inputs and those kinds of things. One example from a textbook I used to use talks about the elasticity of beachfront property. Well, that's going to be inelastic. It's going to be really hard to supply more beachfront land because there's only so much land available. The example I like to make is which is going to have a greater price elasticity of supply, a baseball or an autographed baseball. Well, what are the inputs? They both require the inputs to a baseball, right? And those are generally freely available. If the price of baseballs goes up, firms can supply more baseballs to the market. But what's the difference between a price of a baseball and a price of an autographed baseball? The autographed baseball has that rare input of the professional player's autograph on it, right? A famous person's autograph. That's a rarer input, so it's harder to supply more of them. And so the price can go up a lot, but you can't necessarily supply more to the market. So that's where that price elasticity of supply is going to come from. So that's important too. Elasticities are going to be affected by preferences, and elasticities are really present in a lot of our things. And what we're going to see is that elasticity is derived from, and you've hopefully already seen it, the slope of the demand curve and the supply curve. When we're talking about price elasticity of demand, it's the percent change in quantity demanded divided by percent change price. And it's how much going from P1 to P2 is going to affect quantity. Then why do we care? Well, think about if you're a firm. If you're a firm, you want to maximize your profit. And your profit is just how much revenue you make minus whatever your costs are. And remember, in economics, we do ceteris paribus. We hold everything constant, so we only change one thing at a time. So if I want to go ahead and I think that my firm could make more money if I lower prices because I'll sell more stuff, then I'm going to lower prices and sell more stuff. But is that actually going to make me more money? Because if you think about it, remember, revenue is just the price of what you sell times the quantity you sell. And when we're dealing with demand, we know that if price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. How much is going to determine whether this is a positive or a negative effect on revenue. Does price go down more than quantity demanded goes up? Then you're going to have negative revenue because the downward pressure on price is worth more than the upward pressure on quantity, right? But if price elasticity is very high, if there's a high price elasticity of demand, that means a small change in price will have a big effect on quantity demanded. So that means that we'll actually see this be bigger than this, and revenue will go up because the upward pressure on quantity is going to be greater than the downward pressure on price. Does that kind of make sense? And that's where it becomes important. That's why firms should care about their elasticities. So think about if you were selling cups of coffee. Let's do an example. Let's do something that is a necessity and something that is more of a luxury. So if we are, let's do bread and hotel rooms. And before we draw the demand curves, we want to think about which is going to have a higher price elasticity, which is going to be something where firms are going to be, where consumers are going to be more responsive to a change in price. Is it going to be, well, what are hotel rooms? Hotel rooms are a luxury good. They have substitutes. Right nowadays, you can rent an Airbnb. You don't have to go on vacation. There's a lot of options. So it's much more of a luxury. It's fairly narrowly defined, but it's not something people need to buy. So we're going to expect it to have a relatively high price elasticity of demand. Compared to bread, we're going to expect to be having a pretty low price elasticity of demand. Oh, didn't need to write that. Because it's more of a necessity. If you eat bread, you probably eat a little bit every day. And there's not a lot of things you would substitute for it, right? So if bread has a pretty high or a pretty low price elasticity of demand, that means it's going to have a pretty steep demand curve. We're going to compare that to hotel rooms that are going to have a pretty flat, elastic demand curve. And then we're going to have a price change. And we're not going to make a silly assumption like they're the same price. I'm just going to keep the price levels the same. So just assume that they're on a different scale over here for the sake of this example. So let's say a loaf of bread is $4. And I'm going to come over here and make the exact same price, but a hotel room we're going to say is $150. And that's going to give us our first quantity right here. Now, if both of these firms want to try and raise revenue, one way to raise revenue would be to lower prices. or raise prices? Should we lower prices or raise prices? Let's raise prices. Let's say we want to make more money, costs are going up, we need to increase revenue. Let's raise prices up. So we're going to increase prices for both of these firms. What do we have here? Let's try this one. I'm going to increase them by about 50%. So if this is $2, this will be $6. And I'm going to do the same thing for hotel rooms. If this was $150, this is going to be $225. And then we want to see what's the effect on quantity, right? We know it's going to go down, but how much it goes down is a function of the elasticity. There's the decrease in the quantity of bread, but here's the decrease in the quantity of hotel rooms. So in both cases, we have said, okay, we want to change revenue by raising prices, and we know we'll get a lower quantity, but hopefully the increase in price will be greater than the decrease in quantity. Is that true? Well, for bread, it is. For bread, we see a big increase in price had a small, relatively, decrease in quantity. And if you want to look at it graphically, what I like to do is we can draw a little rectangle. So this was the revenue before, and this is the revenue now. So they lost this little rectangle and gained this rectangle. What about the hotel rooms? The hotel rooms had this level of revenue before, and now their revenue is here. So they gained this section up here, but they lost this entire section. And so you can see how the elasticity affects whether revenue goes up or goes down with the price change. If you're raising prices, then you're going to want something that has low elasticity, because the price will go up a little. The price can go up, but quantity demanded won't go down by much, and so the overall effect on revenue is positive. If it's something with high price elasticity, that price is going to go up, and the effect on quantity demanded is going to be so much bigger that the net effect on revenue is going to be negative. And so you'll see your profits go down. Does that make sense? We could do it the other way. We could look at what would happen if we lowered prices. Let's get a different color up in here. Here we go. If we lowered prices by about the same amount, again, we'd see not a big effect on bread, but a big effect on hotels. Look how much the revenue increased when we lowered prices. And so that's why it's important to pay attention to elasticities, because as a firm, knowing whether your good is elastic or not is going to tell you whether you want to raise prices or lower prices to change your revenue and to change your profit. Does that make sense? That's important. The other thing was income elasticities, how responsive you are in terms of which goods you're going to buy more or less of when you raise your income. If you get a raise, are you going to buy more gas? Maybe not, maybe a little, but are you going to buy more fun things, more leisure activities? Yeah. And when you have to cut, if you have to cut your budget, what goes first? Is it your necessities or your luxuries? And so when we think about necessities and luxuries, we want to think about them in terms of which do we buy more of when we're rich and buy fewer of when we're feeling poor. And then inferior goods are just those weird goods that we tend to buy only when we're feeling poor or only when our income is low. So store brand goods or generic brand goods instead of name brand goods. You can think about an inferior good being like making your own coffee versus going and getting coffee at a coffee shop, those kinds of things. So let me know. Hopefully this helps you understand elasticities a little better. And let me know what questions you have and what other subjects you'd like a little more help on, and I'll see you next time.